Oh, GREGBOT, the pioneer in theories that began to kill off people's interest in this series. For almost 2 years now, people have battled triumphantly, fans going for each other's throats over one rude child in a video game. Still, to this day, the question remains, is Gregory a robot? I know there are plenty of GREGBOT theories out there, but for this video, I'm specifically going to be discussing MatPat's version of the theory, primarily because it's where GREGBOT really began, but secondly, he's generously crammed all of the evidence into a single image, and I'm lazy, so this makes things easier for me. To summarize what MatPat's theory concludes very quickly, Gregory is a robot child built by Afton as a recreation of the crying child from FNaF 4. I know you all have probably heard that plenty of times by now, but for completeness, I thought I'd remind you. That being said, for the sake of having a more clear video, I'm going to be splitting the evidence up into two categories. The first category is the evidence primarily in favor of Gregory being a robot. The second category will be the evidence that connects him to the crying child. But anyways, in the end, our category should look something like that. Also, something I want to throw into the mix is mysteriously absent from this image is reasoning used from the original versions of the GREGBOT theory, which refer back to the post-it note room in the staffbot silo. Basically, a bunch of post-it notes in this room show a robot's progression into thinking and writing like a child, and also in that room is a table which, interestingly, seems to recreate the Afton family. We'll just go ahead and throw this into the robot category, since that's the most prominent point of this detail. So, to start, let's try and deconstruct the robot-centric pieces of evidence, starting off the mysterious static vision Gregory gets when Vanny is nearby. When Security Breach came out, this made enough sense. At that time, the only thing we could think of that would cause this is the idea we're looking through a robot's eyes. I mean, humans I know don't really face ailments like this, so fair enough, but since Security Breach has come out, we have seen ways that humans could see things with weird red hues and scan lines in their vision. And let me show it to you. What, did you miss it? Let me slow it down. And there. In Ruin, in the first and last moments you have the mask on, things are displayed in a reddish hue, and your entire vision is covered with scanline-like things. I know some may argue this is an effect caused by the eyes of the mask itself, but as shown in this frame, the scanlines still remained for a brief moment, even when the mask's eyes are away from yours. So what's my conclusion here? Well, maybe this vision effect has nothing to do with being a robot, and more so has something to do with having the Vanny chip installed in your mind. I mean, as I said, these scan lines are visible in the first and last moments you have the mask on. The instances where the mask isn't quite on, but still near your head, and by consequence, the chip. From this I deduce that some type of interference occurs to chip bearers when the mask is near them. Anyways, given Vanny's actual mask in-game is a little bit of a different design, it's possible she has an upgraded version, one that causes these visual distortions to happen to chip bearers from even further distances away. And this idea that Gregory was once chipped and controlled by Glitchtrap isn't too far-fetched. The story GGY seems to heavily point to Gregory being Patient 46, someone who likes wearing masks, and it has been seen in the Pizzaplex talking with someone who has rabbit ears. And this leads me to my next point. His robotic behavior in GGY. This is something that is also left off of the evidence image, but something Matt mentions in the same video this image comes from. He points out a quote from GGY that describes Gregory acting robotically, almost as if he's an AI. There's some problems with this though. Mainly, this could just be further evidence towards the idea that Gregory was under Glitchtrap's control. This same robotic behavior is something documented by Tape Girl in Help Wanted, as Jeremy, the colleague who was also tormented by Glitchtrap, is said to have these same robotic mannerisms.
He doesn't even jump anymore, nothing scares him. He just stands there like he's talking to someone. Sometimes he rocks from side to side.
And although I don't like doing this, I also decided to take a peek into the old FNaF AR emails, to see if Vanessa's ever said to act in a similar way, and yeah, she kind of is. I came by your desk to say hi today, and I don't think you even heard me. You had your face so close to the screen, that can't be good for your eyes. I know, I sound like somebody's grandma. I waited for a second to see if you would turn around, but it was like you were in another world. Another counterpoint to this evidence is this isn't the proof Matt thinks it is in regards to Gregory being a robot. Sure, in pop culture, a robot character is often defined by these robotic mannerisms, but in FNaF that is fundamentally not how it works. Using the Silver Eyes as an example, there really is no tell that Charlie is a robot before the big reveal. She bleeds, she has relationships, she even technically ages, and assuming she and everyone around her were shocked to hear she's a robot, chances are she was completely indistinguishable from a normal human. So in other words, if it's established that robots, when made to act as humans, are indistinguishable from humans, why are we looking at these robotic traits and characters to prove they're a robot? That fundamentally goes against the rules the series is based around, but I'll return to this point later. So yeah, to me it's pretty clear a lot of these robot ideas are actually better descriptive of someone who was once being controlled by Glitch Trap, given his symptoms connect to some things we've seen from other Glitch Trap oriented things. But moving away from that, let's talk about what I feel the worst point of evidence in this is. Freddy's comment when he gets Roxy's eyes.
I am having a hard time adjusting. You look different to me.
Like, don't get me wrong, if Gregory was a robot, he probably would look different to Freddy using his see-through vision. But would he not look different if he was a human? I mean, the human skeleton looks pretty different from the person's exterior. I don't know, this is really the only piece of evidence I feel is really pushing it. So much so I'd call it a piece of non-evidence. No matter what Gregory is, be it human, robot, slime monster, chances are his insides and his outsides look pretty different. Back on track to the notable pieces of evidence, Matt goes on to point out how the mysterious wall code in the Michael Afton room pretty accurately describes Gregory's actions throughout Security Breach, almost like they were instructions given to him. According to Matt, the Pigpen cipher is very similar to the language of the Mimic described in the Storyteller's story of Tales from the Pizzaplex. But I mean, does it really? Of the listed squiggles, squares, loops, and triangles within triangles, the only one of those shapes that really appears is the triangles, which, by the way, aren't even within other triangles. So, to me, this is a point that falls flat in that regard. Even if this was the language of the Mimic, chances are our trusty former Glitch Trap victim theory still applies. If Gregory had the Mimic 1 program, aka Glitch Trap, running in his mind, chances are he'd be able to read its language. Even that aside, I can't deny that these instructions do seem to describe Gregory's actions one for one. While I can't deny that I don't have a super strong explanation of who would have left these instructions or why, I would like to pose the idea that maybe they aren't instructions at all. Keep in mind, in Security Breach, it takes a while for Gregory to get the idea to destroy the animatronics and get the Phaser Blaster and Phascam. Really, the idea only comes to mind after he sees the blueprints of the animatronics and parts in service. If he was already given instructions to destroy them, why is this the thing that motivated him to do so? My best idea is these aren't instructions at all. It's a record of what Gregory has already done. That is to say, someone is watching him and recording his actions in this strange language. Keep in mind, to access this room, you need both Freddy upgrades and the Phascam. That means, canonically, in order to reach this room, Gregory would already have to have crushed the Vile Band, and furthermore, the ability to flash and shoot them. Now, who would be recording this is another question, but it is worth noting the TV is still on, and popcorn is knocked over once we reach this room, like it's the den of some mastermind who fled before we got there. Anyways, moving on, I'm cramming the last 2 points in this image together. The recurring theme of robot children and the robotic heads and sister location. My thing with these points is they at most prove that robot humans are possible, which I mean, we don't really need to prove to begin with. The Sticky Note Room and the Silver Eyes novels are all the proof I need that robot kids are possible in this universe. In general, the way of thinking that a main character has to be a robot on the account that it's shown a few times elsewhere in the series is fundamentally flawed. Would they suggest the possibility that Gregory is a robot? Sure. But by the same token, it suggests that absolutely anyone could be a robot. And this ties into my grand point about why this way of thinking is fundamentally flawed. It can apply to anyone, and it's manifested in this way too. The robot theories don't end at Gregory. Vanessa and Cassie in the games, Mike and Garrett in the movies. Constantly, people are making theories that a new human character will turn out to be a robot in the end. Even myself, sitting in the theater watching the FNaF movie, I had a hunch that Vanessa was going to turn out to be a robot by the end. People are justifiably tired of these robot theories, and I'm kind of in the same boat. However, I can admit that just because a theory is common doesn't necessarily make it wrong. What I will point out is, if this way of thinking seems applicable to every main human character we're coming across in the series, is it not just possible that this thought process is flawed? A non-argument in that sense. This problem is even worsened by the precedent for robot humans in the series. In the Silver Eyes, the only way Charlie finds out she's a robot is by having the reality of her memories revealed to her, and that they were recordings made by her father and implanted into her mind. Nothing else in her time growing up tipped her or anyone else off that she's a robot. And for the other robot people in the series, well, if you look into it, find that there really aren't any, at least none that serve the same purpose that Charlie did in the Silver Eyes books, or what Gregory is accused of being. As some examples, Lally from Lally's game, not a robot kid, just a robot that looks like a kid. I don't see people counting the Biddy Babs as robot children. In the story Help Wanted, there are people revealed to be robots, but A, their human appearance is likely more due to something similar to the illusions that give the nightmares their appearance. And B, these people aren't supposed to be robots that blend into society as fake humans. They're specifically confined to the house Steve finds himself in. I suppose there's Mr. Renner, who I guess could be argued to be a robot person, but that's never specifically called out to explain what he is. The black ooze that comes from his face may be agony, if anything. But sure, we can count Mr. Renner. While we're at it, let's count Eleanor too. She's a robot/agony being who can disguise herself as a human. Still different from what Charlie is, but it's close enough. To make a long story short, if you actually look for examples of so-called robot people in FNaF books, the only example that compares to what Gregory is being accused of being is Charlie. Every other supposed example differs in their own way, be it in that they're illusions on robots, or illusions on actual piles of garbage. Honestly, if we're using common themes in the book's its reasoning, it's more likely that Gregory is a garbage monster held together by a heart pendant at this point, given that specific type of fake human happens more times than the Charlie bot-esque thing. But alas, that's not what the theories state. GREGBOT theories always boil down to the idea that Gregory is a robot comparable to Charlie and the Silver Eyes. But there's a huge problem with that. It's very easy to prove such a person is a robot. Just show us their blueprints or the origins of their memories and boom, official. However, proving someone isn't a robot of this fashion is completely impossible. As I've said multiple times, the entire point of these robots is they are indistinguishable from humans, so most forms of revealing someone to be a robot as seen in pop culture don't work. These robots eat, bleed, cry, probably have most other bodily functions. Hell, if we're to assume Charlie ever went to the doctor for her checkup, it may even be possible her insides are indistinguishable from a human's. Getting back to the humanoid animatronics and sister location, may I ask, what is this trying to prove? Sure, it shows William was experimenting on making humanoid robots, I can't deny that, but if you look to the Silver Eyes books again, you get a key piece of information about William's character that's pretty hard to ignore. Fundamentally, he never figured out how to replicate a human as a robot. He has to steal Henry's work to get it done. So if the theory states that GREGBOT was built by William, or the mimic mimicking William, as the conclusion to the human robot test shown in sister location, chances are Gregory would look less like a real kid and more like Balloon Boy. As a whole, I feel a lot of these robot evidence pieces simply don't work, or aren't relevant to what we know, but furthermore, have explanations more in line with the current narrative. Since this arc of FNaF began, people have had their minds taken over by AI. Is it not plausible the same happened to Gregory? Not to mention, the specific type of robot people claim Gregory is just so happens to be the one that's impossible to prove wrong. The trash monsters mentioned earlier are held together by a heart pendant. The illusion robots in stories like Help Wanted are accompanied by a high-pitched ringing sound. The Charlie Bot brand of robot has no tell. The only way to know for sure is to have the story grab you by the shoulders and say, hey, this kid is a robot. But that rambling aside, let's finally cover the mysterious sticky note room. Without a doubt, it shows the mind of a robot becoming more akin to the mind of a child. But at most, that shows that a robot child is loose in the Pizzaplex, not necessarily that it's Gregory. I mean, throughout the main game and Ruin, we can find indications that other people have been living here, with outposts being found all around the Pizzaplex, even in the sewers, which, may I point out, is connected to the staff bot silo. This character seems more correlated with Chica, if anything. Even beyond that, we know that somebody's placing Nightmarion plushies all around the Pizzaplex, and in the same room, there are Nightmarion staff bot heads. Furthermore, don't forget that the door to this room is called Charlie Door in the files, and that Charlie is the character known to be a robot in the first place. So if you want my honest answer, that's who I think lived in this room. To be clear, I don't think this person was literally Charlie. I more so think they're a character meant to fulfill a similar role to Charlie. If I were to guess, given all the puppet imagery ties back to Nightmarion, I'd say this kid robot is a little more malicious than Charlie is known to be. That is to say, they represent something similar to what Charlie represents in other source material, but the twisted reflection of what she actually was. For example, in the original series, Charlie was a protector of the innocent. Perhaps now, she's a protector of the evil, like the Mimic. But with this more symbolic way of thinking in mind, I think it's time to pivot over to the other category, the connections to the crying child. In the same video where MatPat graciously displays a single image with his evidence, he discusses the idea of going into these series with an N or intuitive mindset, as opposed to an S or sensory one. That is, rather than taking things at face value, taking things in with room for interpretation. This part of the video had me scratching my head a little, not just because from my perspective it felt like an out of character and dismissive generalization to be making, but furthermore I feel the entire basis of these crying child connections is inherently sensory oriented. I mean, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it likely is a duck, but to me, I would have to disagree. I already did a separate video about this, but I feel a lot of these connections between Gregory and the crying child could be symbolic more than literal. You'll have to check that video out to see my full thoughts. But to throw a new idea out there, in the original FNaF story, it's often thought that the bite of 83 was the catalyst for everything that came after. Again, this isn't confirmed, it's just often thought to be the case. So these connections to the crying child could be intentional, but meant to be taken more symbolically, specifically in the sense that it's meant to show that Gregory is filling the shoes of the crying child in this era. Much like the crying child was the catalyst for everything in the original saga, Gregory is the catalyst for what's to come in the new saga. I mean, he's likely the one who caused Glitchtrap to infect the Pizzaplex, he's the one who frees Vanessa, and likely seals up the Mimic. He's, by consequence, possibly to blame for the entire downfall of the Pizzaplex. In other words, these crying child connections are a symbolic way to show he's taking on the role of that character in this new saga. But even with that explained, I still feel obligated to go through Matt's evidence, just as a means to be fair. Let's start with the Afton family replication in the StaffBot silo. If I believe the robot from this room is actually filling in the role of Charlie, why is the Afton family seemingly replicated in the same room? Well, it could be more of a dramatic irony thing. We know from some of the post-it notes this child is interested in having a family, so maybe they set this table up to build what they saw as the prototype of a family, complete with a mom, a dad, a sister or brother, and a gender-obscure sibling. We're the ones filling in the gaps that this person may have unintentionally recreated a family that we already know of. But B, it could even play into the idea of Twisted Charlie that I was talking about earlier. In the Silver Eyes books, Baby is actually built from the remains of the adult Charlie bot destroyed by Henry. William steals this destroyed robot and makes it into Baby, who of course becomes possessed by Elizabeth, in a way making Charlie part of the Afton family, just as a very distorted picture of who Charlie was supposed to be. But even still, I can't say this is fully satisfying. Now that we're pretty confident in saying that Glitchtrap isn't William Afton, and instead is the Mimic, why is the Afton family being rebuilt anyway? I mean, even if you believe Burntrap is William and not the Mimic, the fact is he's trapped in the sinkhole below the Pizzaplex by the time we stumble into this room, so this couldn't be his doing either. I would be happy to hear your thoughts below though. Moving on, let's discuss the visual similarities Matt uses to connect Gregory to the crying child. The first of which is the infamous design connections. The light skin, brown hair, dark eyes, striped shirt, and shorts. And hey, I think this is a very fair connection to make. Personally, I take these connections more symbolically than literally, as I've said, but there is still a bit of a problem I have. The clothes are all different colors from the crying child. The shirt is blue and not black. The pants are khaki and not blue. The shoes are red and white and not brown. If Steel Wool was really trying to make Gregory in the image of the crying child, wouldn't it have been clearer if they had matched the colors of these clothing items? To be honest, I think these design comparisons could be at the fault of a different dilemma in the series, the repetition of designs. There are an uncountable number of boys with green shirts on in the original series. Plus, not only does Scott's archetype for what a little girl looks like appear in multiple times in the series, but you can even find these designs in Scott's earlier work. This is probably a topic I'll need to dedicate an entire video on, but despite popular rhetoric in the theorist community, yes, I do think coincidences happen in FNaF, and more often than you think. But hey, just for the sake of argument, let's continue with the perception these design details are in fact deliberate. The next piece of visual evidence in the grid is purple equals Afton. I mean, I've already checked multiple times and Gregory's shirt is verifiably blue and not purple. But I think what Matt actually means by this ties into the next piece of evidence on the board, how he appears in the good ending image. Not only is Gregory's shirt purple, but furthermore, the Freddy popsicle he's eating is notably yellowish and has a bite taken out of it, connecting it, of course, to the bite of 83. Now, what I think is really being illustrated here is shading. I actually use this practice a lot in my thumbnail art, where rather than having colors cast in shadows just be a darker shade of the base color, I'll switch them to be a dark purple color to make them pop more. Likewise, parts of objects caught in direct light are given an orangish highlight, but of course, symbolism can hide in the shadows. Hell, even in my original Midnight Motors thumbnail, I use the coloration of light and shadow to show the transition from purple guy into the orange/yellow guy from the minigame. Even though that video claims it's not Afton, I'm getting off track here. Point is, shading or not, I think it's worthwhile to treat this piece of evidence fairly, as it could be symbolic. Again, I prefer my explanation that it doesn't literally mean Gregory is the crying child, but there's something else I need to call out. God has gone on record to say he will often try to clear up confusion from previous games through details in future games. So it may or may not be notable that on the Brazil ending of Ruin, Gregory is no longer eating that Freddy popsicle. Now it's been replaced with a regular ice cream cone. Plus, his shirt is more noticeably blue in some parts. Interestingly though, Vanessa is still cast in purple, while eating the same ice cream cone she had before, so maybe that's something to think about in terms of their symbolism. But finally, we end up at the broken line from the beginning of the game. People have called out the fact that originally this line mentions Gregory bleeding instead. This kinda makes sense with the bandages in Gregory's design and the fact we were sent to the first aid station right after this moment, but hey, I feel to be fair, it's important to consider the fact we can't know for sure the reasons why details like this have been changed. It is likely this change was made to better secure the T rating, but it's important to consider other options as well. Namely, the idea the word usage of broken could be a direct connection to the crying child. This seems sound enough in my opinion, but I do have some drawbacks with it. As I said earlier, I do believe that coincidences happen in FNaF, pretty frequently in fact. If every time a color, God forbid an adjective, is used to describe a certain character, that detail is reserved for that character alone, wouldn't there come a point where we've run out of colors and adjectives to use? Of course, to give Matt due credit, despite what the community at large thinks. I don't think he's grasping at straws here. Specifically, I have a hunch that he probably wouldn't have made any conclusion about this word choice if not for the other comparisons already made to the crying child. I mean, other characters like Baby are described as broken in the series, but Matt hasn't tried to claim they're the crying child. So, point is, I feel this is a piece of evidence that is fair enough, in the case that these other connections were intentional to begin with. But before I conclude, there is one thing I need to explain. I've said multiple times throughout this video that I see the connections between these two characters, but I don't believe that the connection is to be taken literally. So I feel it's important to explain why that is. As some quick commentary, the most common so-called counterpoint to the GREGBOT theory is, I quote, "It's stupid." And I feel especially back when this theory was fresh, that's why people didn't like it. It wasn't because they thought Matt's evidence was wrong, but because the conclusion that would draw is frustrating. I, however, had a different reason to suspect this theory was wrong from the beginning. Namely the fact that Gregory's character seems to be completely different from that of the crying child, like not even a polar opposite like I suggested with my Twisted Charlie hypothesis earlier. I just mean, these characters are not the same, period. Gregory's rude, even to Freddy, who's supposedly his favorite character. More notably, he doesn't seem scared of, well, anything. I mean, a large portion of Security Breach is occupied by him throwing hands with the robots, so the only time he seems genuinely frightened in the game is when he falls down the garbage chute. Given what he says to Freddy in Parts and Service, it honestly sounds like he's more angry at the animatronics than scared, which totally breaks what we know of the crying child. I mean, the Silver Eyes shows that yes, a robot version of a character doesn't necessarily take on their personality. However, there's usually some level of pampering going on in those cases. From how Gregory is described and shown, if he were a robot of the crying child, he should be very similar to that character. But he's not. I mean, Charlie Baby was imperfect, and became a twisted image of Charlie because of William's meddling. What then would lead to a totally passable child robot only being different in terms of his personality, especially if he's rebuilt by his own father. So with that out of the way, I want to conclude with a description of what I think Gregory's story is. Playing a defective copy of the Freddy Fazbear virtual experience, Gregory's mind is invaded by the malicious Mimic 1 virus, aka Glitch Trap. Under its control, Gregory is forced to kill his own parents, and takes on the pseudonym of Dr. Rabbit. To be clear, the dead parents thing is something I gleaned from the therapy tapes, where the therapist suspiciously asked patient 46, who I think is Gregory, why they'd lie about their parents, and they seem ashamed to answer. Anyways, now as an orphan, Gregory is attracted to the hub of the Mimic's operations. With the lead security guard of the Mega Pizzaplex also under the control of Glitch Trap, Gregory easily manages to waltz on in, where the hacking skills the Mimic virus pulled from Gregory's mind are used to infect the entire Pizzaplex with Mimic 1, making the animatronics more creepy than eerie, and causing the arcade machines around the Pizzaplex to experience glitches. Alongside these glitches, the arcade machines also begin to house the consciousnesses of those enslaved by the Mimic, with Vanessa becoming trapped in Princess Quest, and Gregory being trapped in Balloon World, their only hope of salvation being if somebody beats their respective games. Meanwhile, Gregory meets with the same therapist as Vanessa, killing each of them one by one, either by his own hacking skills or by the work of the crazed Fazbear employee working to glitch out all the arcade machines. Gregory is freed from Balloon World and wakes up in his hidey hole behind the daycare. Trying to leave, the Mimic takes notice that Gregory is no longer plugged into the system and sends Vanessa after him. Frightened, he acts Glamrock Freddy and hides inside of him, where we meet him at the start of Security Breach. As he crushes the Vile Band, shoots them, and flashes them, an actual robot child who was once living in the Post-it note room starts to record what Gregory has done, possibly watching him, hinted to by the Nightmarion plushies hidden around the Pizzaplex. His striking resemblance to the crying child from 4 comes from the fact that Gregory is a catalyst for the story of this new saga. So, do I like this explanation? Absolutely. Do I think I've convinced MatPat Gregory isn't a robot? Not really. Mainly, I feel it's unlikely he will be stumbling upon my videos anytime soon, but even beyond that, I feel at most you will find my thoughts to be interesting, yet not game-breaking for the reasons I mentioned earlier. I never actually disproved GREGBOT, namely because doing so is an impossibility. Instead, I describe an alternate explanation that, while interesting, may not be enough to trump the idea he already has. But I'm okay with that. Believe it or not, I don't think Matt's theory is completely impossible. Personally, I just need direct confirmation, such as Gregory's blueprints, to fully be on board. To restate why that is, I'm generally not the biggest fan of seemingly all-encompassing arguments, or non-arguments as I call them. If there is no way to disprove Gregory's status as a robot, then I can only feel inclined to be on board if there's something directly confirming his robot status to us. Believing in things that can't be proven wrong gets you stuck in a pitfall of never considering other possibilities. After all, why would you if the one you have seems flawless? It's a big no-no for me. I know some have accused me of trying to push a narrative with my videos, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not the type of theorist to only believe one version of the story at a time. For most issues, especially the ones I've covered on my channel, I actually tend to consider multiple possibilities simultaneously, like with the origins of the Shadow animatronics, or in this case, the origins of Gregory. My final remark is I encourage you all to do the same. Maybe you believe in something unconfirmed yet also seems completely undisputable. Even still, you may find enjoyment in exploring the other avenues out there, and hell, doing so may open your minds to all the possibilities this franchise holds. But I think that's enough yapping about this subject. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you disagree with me in this video, I'm happy to hear why that is. I try to answer as many questions as possible in the comments, so ask away. Also, if you guys really like this video, maybe consider sending it MatPat's way. Even though I debate his ideas frequently on this channel, you may be shocked to hear I'm actually a pretty big fan, and would love for him to see this, so that all aside, I'll see you all next time.